This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by the one and only Cam Lau. Today is June 2nd, 2025. I guess it's National Rotisserie Chicken Day. I don't know. The civil rights activist Malcolm X, who has a lot of questionable opinions that I don't necessarily agree with, he did get it right with this quote. If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people being oppressed and loving those doing the oppressing. Before I do bless you with my political insights, you're going to have to pay for it. This podcast is presented weekly, free to you, and all I ask in return is that you give me a 5-star rating wherever you listen, especially if you're listening on Spotify. A bunch of liberal people that know me went on there and gave me low ratings, so I think we're sitting at like 2 stars right now because of that. So we need to get that boosted up. I need all of you conservative people to come out and support me with 5 stars on Spotify and everywhere else. Also, to keep up on everything we're doing, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at the Conservative American Message. That'll be your ticket to admission for today. When most people think of the nation of South Africa, they probably think of Nelson Mandela. If you know a little more than that, you might know or have at least heard of apartheid. Apartheid was the system of segregation that took place in South Africa up until the 90s, where the black people and the white people were segregated based on their race, and white people were they were racist, and that doesn't mean every white person was racist in that time frame. It just means that there was a system that, granted, was a racist system. Segregation's not a good thing. We don't support that. I don't support it. Jim Crow laws were bad. However, Jim Crow laws and apartheid, very similar, are not some atrocious human crime like a genocide or slavery that we need to reconcile with. It was just, there was bad actors, there was bad things going on, and we fixed it. We did it, both in the United States and in South Africa. We got rid of racism. It's gone. So we have to compare these massive events to other things, because when you get racial tensions high, it can lead to other issues like genocide, like slavery. We saw what happened in Rwanda among different races of black people who genocided each other because of their race. So it isn't so easy to just say, well, there's the oppressor and the oppressed, and it's going to be that way forever no matter what system. We have to pay attention to what is actually happening. What is the crime? Because certainly genocide is much worse than segregation. So I mentioned Nelson Mandela. As you may know, he was the president of South Africa who, prior to being elected, served 27 years in prison for plotting to overthrow the government. He was somewhat of a revolutionary who is somewhat credited with the end of apartheid. He was released in the 90s from prison when apartheid ended, and even though he was supposed to serve a life sentence for his treason, he was let out due to the culture shift that happened in the country at the time. And of course, with that, they elected him as the first black president of South Africa. And that's all fine and dandy, That's great that an African nation can elect a black man to be their president. But the problem is getting too carried away with this ending apartheid thing. Because, like I said, you can lead down some dangerous paths. Nelson Mandela's own wife in the 90s headed an organization that was responsible for kidnapping, torturing, and murdering their political dissidents. She was literally convicted in South Africa of kidnapping a 14-year-old boy who died. So Nelson Mandela might be painted in the history books and in elementary schools across the United States that he's some hero in Africa. But really, we got to look at the whole story, because there's a lot more to it. So there was segregation in the 90s, and now we're looking at 30 years since then, since it ended. But today still, there is slavery in much of Africa. You go to northern Africa, there's just slaves everywhere, sex slaves, laborers, all these kinds of people who are enslaved, a lot of times based on their race. And so we're so concerned about a country that ended their racism decades ago, when you have literal slavery and atrocious human rights violations happening right before our face and we just ignore it in the United States. But to understand this whole South African thing, we need to look at what are the main groups of people in the country. So it isn't just white people and black people, and the black people are good and the white people are bad, or vice versa. There are a bunch of different ethnic groups among both the blacks and the white populations. So there's several different African tribes that even to this day don't necessarily get along with each other. You know, a lot of the political parties are based on these different tribes and stuff in the country. And I'll be honest, I didn't do the time to do the research of these different tribes and who was who and all this, because that isn't really what the conversation's about today. But I'll admit that there are very distinct groups of black Africans in South Africa, and some of them are the bad actors in this current situation, and some of them are not. And I don't want to paint all black people in South Africa as being these violent, genocidal, tribal people, but there are a group that are trending that way. So we have to be aware of that. You see, blacks in South Africa make up 80% of the population, so they're not this small oppressed minority like they can paint themselves to be in, you know, some of these more European or American countries. You know, when you're in Africa, you're probably going to have a lot of black people, believe it or not. So they're not the minority. They control the country. And yes, for a time, there might have been more whites with more wealth and more power. But at the end of the day, when you have 80% of the population, I mean, what's the rule? It takes 3.5% of the population to overthrow a government. You cannot tell me that they are this oppressed minority when 80% of the people are there. But the problem is it isn't 80% of the people who are causing these problems. It is a small minority of black people, but it's growing because of the rhetoric that's being pushed in the country and in the whole world. So as far as the white population goes, there's two distinct groups of white people, and they're very different, just like the different groups of black people. So about 2/3 of the white people in South Africa are Afrikaners. The other third are what are called English. So many South Africans that I've listened to or heard things from believe that the solution to a lot of these problems would just be to break up the country into different territories for each different ethnic group. Because that's what all of these ethnic groups want, is just to not necessarily segregate amongst a whole culture, but just divide out the territories that, you know, your people live here, my people live here, and we can all just live in peace. But trying to have this big postmodern melting pot that the world is pushing for, it doesn't work. It always leads to bad results. It just has happened way too many times. If people hate each other and there's a deep-rooted, centuries-old hatred, you're not going to fix that because you have some diversity training. So there's a lot of South Africans on every side of this that I think would just appreciate just splitting the country up into different territories. But as far as the different white groups, the English are the more well-established, well-connected, wealthy people with all the power. Those are the ones who put in the system of apartheid, the ones that maybe did do some bad things to black people in the past. The Afrikaners, who are bearing the brunt of all of this, are mostly just poor or middle-class farmers. They're not the wealthy, power, exploitive white man. It's just not the case. I mean, the Afrikaners, they didn't come and colonize the South African, the Horn of Africa there. They descended from Dutch people who settled the Cape before any African ever was there. The actual black Africans were mostly nomadic tribes, and none of them were settled in that area. None of them owned that land or had any claim to it whatsoever. The Dutch came and took some land that was just available. I mean, when you compare what happened in South Africa to what happened in the United States and Canada, it's not nearly as bad. I mean, they did not kill a bunch of African people for their land. That's just a complete farce. So they didn't steal the land, they settled it, and they're the ones that developed all of the infrastructure and the culture in that part of the world. Most of these settlers, like I said, were Dutch farmers, but then a lot of them were also Huguenots. So the Huguenots, they were these French Protestants that had to flee from the oppressive Catholic Church in like the 15th century, I think, or maybe the 16th, I don't remember. But basically, the Huguenots were Calvinist Protestants that were being killed by the thousands. The thousands in France. They were being killed by the Catholic Church because of their beliefs. So they fled, and a lot of them ended up in South Africa. So these Afrikaners or Dutch farmers and Huguenots, another term that is used to describe them is the Boers, which is actually just Dutch for farmer. However, it is kind of turned into a derogatory term used against white people in the country. So the persecution that the Huguenots faced was far worse than any level of discrimination that ever happened against blacks in South Africa. I will absolutely stand on that point, because you're talking about the killing of people just simply for their beliefs, and you compare that to just some segregation, it is no comparison. And like I said, that doesn't make racism okay, but it's just objectively worse. So when it was the 17th century. Now I'm looking at my notes. In the 17th century, many of these Huguenots fled to this Dutch settlement in South Africa. Of course, as they do with everything, the British eventually got a hold of it when they pretty much controlled the whole world at the height of the British Empire. So that would also include South Africa. And just like everywhere else they were, including in America, the British were an oppressive ruler. You know, it wasn't just the United States. It wasn't just South Africa. You had India. You have Ireland. If you haven't had an issue with Britain in your country's history, are you really even a country? I mean, let's be real here. So South Africa finally did break free from Great Britain in the 1960s, and ever since, they've been a democracy. So that brings us back to the beginning of all this, where in the 1990s, we saw the end of apartheid in the country. Fast forward to today, and now there are claims of a genocide against white people starting to take place in South Africa. There are black politicians who are literally publicly calling for whites to have their land and their lives taken by force. You know, after we've seen what happened in Rwanda and other places in the world, I don't know how we can sit back and the world, we just don't care. It doesn't matter to us because white people are just bad and they're just racist. In reality, though, this is a humanitarian crisis that the UN needs to get all over. So Trump actually is the one who is going to maybe do something about this when no one else will. He met with the president of South Africa and he absolutely called him out. President Ramaphosa, I don't know how you say that, but he denies any genocide or any anti-white rhetoric happening in South Africa at all. So the media totally agrees with that. They say that Trump is just stupid, he's lying. Well, Donald Trump is smarter than that. He brought receipts. So he wheels in a TV into the Oval Office in the middle of this televised meeting and shows a video in South African Parliament of black people chanting anti-white rhetoric and saying they will do whatever they want to do to the white population. He also has videos of thousands chanting "Kill the Boers." The mainstream media, after seeing this happen, after seeing Trump provide literal video evidence, they claim Trump is just lying. CNN already fact-checked that. It's false. Not real. It never happened. It couldn't happen. I mean, black people can't be racist because they're black, and white people, they're the oppressors. White people in South Africa are the minority. It just doesn't work this way. You can have racism from any level, from any angle. It does not matter. And when you have literal video evidence and the media still denies it, it's absolutely disgusting. It has been confirmed that radicals in South Africa, even confirmed by the mainstream media, that there are radicals that have been attacking Boers and their farms, claiming the land and murdering and raping the people. It is ongoing right now, an absolute fact. However, the intellectuals among us, the mainstream media people that are so educated and so much smarter than all of us, they reassure us that this is not a genocide. This is just some minor crimes that, crime happens everywhere in the world, and these people will be held accountable. You be sure of it. But the problem is these crimes are being widely ignored by the government in South Africa, let alone the governments of the entire world. I don't expect some African nation to have the robust criminal justice system that is going to take care of these problems, but I thought that was why we decided that we're going to police the whole world, because nobody else can do it right. If we want to police the world, then let's do it. I mean, it's all or nothing, because I'm not going to the Middle East anymore for no purpose, to no end, to get nothing accomplished, when there's actual humanitarian crisis around the world that we could go and address. I mean, there should be no slavery in the world right now. There should be no sex slavery, sex trafficking. All of that should be done. We could squash that out so easily, but we don't. And you look at the politicians and you look at the people in charge, and they are benefiting, whether they're profiting, whether they are partaking of these crimes. So that's why they don't address these things. And they don't care about some white people getting killed in South Africa, because after all, they're white people, so they don't matter. The less white people that we have in the world, the better the world will be. That's what their belief is. That's what the politicians in South Africa are saying today. So is this a genocide? Is it truly that level where we need to literally send in the United Nations? Well, the National Holocaust Museum defines a genocide by meeting at least one, if not more, of the following 5 criteria. All I need is number 1, being killing members of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Well, would you look at that? I think we qualify for genocide. However, the definition also includes a little caveat that says that a genocide requires the crimes to be internationally recognized. Oh, so I guess we're out. Because as long as we don't recognize that a genocide is happening, then we can't call it a genocide. So by dictionary terms, the mainstream media is correct. So long as they don't admit that there's a genocide, then there isn't. Call me woke, but I don't need a dictionary or the Holocaust Museum to understand that killing someone or a group of people for their skin color is just plain out wrong. Like I said, this is the scenario where the world needs to get involved in protecting an oppressed minority. We've been all over the world doing nothing. We have military bases in nearly every country, and we don't help out when there's actual atrocious crimes happening. Let's actually do some good as Americans. Let's police the world. Let's do it. I'm all for it if we're going to actually do it. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we're policing the world by waving the finger at Iran and getting them pissed off at us, when we could go to South Africa and save a bunch of people who are innocent and have no claim to any of these oppressive things that have happened throughout the centuries. These are just regular people who exist today and are not tied to the crimes of the past. It's why you can't have slave reparations in the United States, but yet we still call for that too. So if we're going to be this stupid in our own country, I guess we have to be stupid everywhere. And calling Donald Trump a liar when he cited literal video evidence proof of pretty much all of his claims is just disgusting. Even if there was no genocide and Donald Trump was an idiot, if he said that there's a genocide going on in this country, I mean, isn't it at least worth it just to go check it out instead of worrying about whether Trump is right or wrong? I mean, it just seems like common sense to me. We know that these farm attacks are happening, and if the world is just going to refuse to act, then there's really no reason to have bodies like the United Nations. There's no reason for the United States to be in every country policing everything. And I guess if that's what we want, if we want to just isolate ourselves, there can be a case made for that too. But you can't have your cake and eat it too. That's all I have time for. Were you offended by this podcast? Good. Thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you all. Have a great week and stay conservative.